Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another live stream on the History Bible podcast. And today we're in our fourth episode of this week's Price Week with Bob Price, and we're going through the seven, or the lucky seven, the seven so-called authentic letters of Paul. The lucky seven is what Bob calls them. And again, as I've said, it's based on his book, The Amazing Colossal Apostle. That's what my questions are based on. And again, the link to purchase it will be in the description below and also in the pinned comment, including the links to several other books that Bob has written over the years and a link to his Substack as well. And lastly, do not forget that if you like this video, if you like the content on this channel, please like and subscribe. It will really help me a lot. It will help me continue to grow this channel. And that being said, Bob, thank you for joining me today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. You know, I got to say two things. I'm perpetually amazed at the work you put into this and the results you harvest from it. Your lineup of guests, incredible. Even though, of course, there's just filler like me. You have a lot of great people. I don't know how you do it. And second, in case anybody thinks, what the heck is with this title, The Amazing Colossal Apostle? Well, I like to be a bit frivolous, and I've titled this book based on the I guess 50s monster movie, The Amazing Colossal Man, where this guy gets radiated and becomes a giant and won't stop growing. And then the sequel, I can't really use that much, The War of the Colossal Beast. What am I going to write about there? But I also have The Night of the Living Savior, and When Gospels Collide, and The Incredible Shrinking Son of Man. So if anybody has any ideas for painfully bad puns that I can work into a scholarly book title, let me know.
So today we're talking about Galatians. I want to start us off with this question. You mentioned that you think that Galatians chapters 3 to 6 are an earlier work, and that you see Galatians 1 and 2 as being more of a Marcionite addition to the text. Can you explain all that?
Yeah, once again, this is not original with me, though I cannot recall offhand who it was that did this interesting article on it. It kind of looks like that in the first chapter, with all the stuff about how Paul did not right off the bat go to visit the head honchos in Jerusalem and so forth, and he says, "I am not lying." It sounds, you could take it as protesting too much, and one scholar said this looks like a Marcionite response, an attempted refutation of the version of Paul's conversion and its aftermath in the book of Acts, because it's certainly the opposite. Even if you don't think that, and you think that it's a unitary letter, and if you even think that Paul wrote it, you still wind up, or some scholars anyway, wind up saying this is a response and a rejoinder to the same rumor that was going around, or propaganda, whatever you want to call it, that sought to subordinate Paul to the Jerusalem apostles, and that Paul, if he's actually the writer, heard about this and said, hey, I want to set the story straight here. I did not obediently make a beeline for these guys to ask their permission to preach my gospel. And it seems to me that's certainly a possibility. It's more contrived, and it takes more speculation than the admittedly speculative theory that the scholar brought forth, that this not only sounds like a rejoinder to Acts, it is, but then would that drag the rest of the letter into being that late or whatever? Well, I don't know, but it does seem to me that that part of it seems post Acts. So that's one problem with it, with it being Pauline, uh, uh, having Pauline authenticity, and also being part of a unitary work rather than an added preface to it. But there's a couple of other little things that let's see. Well, I gotta, since I'm in the first chapter, I might as well point this out. In verse 11, I would have you know, brothers, that the gospel that was preached by me is not man's gospel, for I did not receive it from any man, nor was I taught it, but I received it through a revelation of Jesus Christ. For you've heard of my revelation of Jesus Christ. For what am I doing? I'm skipping from one line to another. I would have been a bad copyist in the early days. If you've heard of my former life in Judaism, how I persecuted the church of God violently and tried to destroy it. And I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my own age among my people. So extremely zealous was I for the traditions of my fathers. But when he who had set me apart before I was born, kind of an echo of Jeremiah there, and who called me by his grace, was pleased to reveal his son to me or in me. You could translate it either way. And that's pretty interesting, because if it means in me, that may be an admission of a purely visionary experience, a dream, or some kind of sudden feeling of new fire being lit within him. And it recalls 2 Corinthians 12, which we were talking about the other day, when he says that he, or whoever wrote it, said he had a visionary ascent to the third heaven, but he doesn't even know whether he actually defied gravity and was sucked up in a kind of one-man rapture, or if it was just a vision. And nor does he care, but there's no way to know. Same sort of iffiness here, right? Was it revealed? Was Christ revealed to him, implying at least more of an objective manifestation, or in him? So it's a subjective inner experience. Like Paul, we don't know. I mean, we don't know what's even intended here, but it's almost a secondary issue. It was a revelation, he says. Was it on the Damascus Road? No reference to that. And some people have said, well, that must be it. He's just making a shorthand reference. I don't know. As Jacob Neusner says, what we cannot show, we do not know. And I would suggest that there is no reference, not even no necessary reference, but not even any likely reference to the Damascus Road business. So for what that's worth. And then he says, to go back to the beginning of verse 16 there, when he was pleased to reveal his son to me or in me, in order that I might preach him among the Gentiles, I did not immediately consult with anyone, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were apostles before me, but I went away into Arabia and returned again to Damascus. So there's the thing. Acts is wrong. That's what they say, but that's not true. I didn't make a beeline there to get the approval of the Home Office. I had my own priorities here for God's will for me, and I went on into Roman Arabia, and then again into Damascus, Syria. And then he says, after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to visit Cephas and remained with him 15 days. But I saw none of the other apostles except James, the Lord's brother. And then he says, in what I'm writing to you before God, I do not lie. So somebody is lying, but it isn't me. Right? I swear what you've heard is not true. I didn't go up to see these people to get their approval. Then I went into the regions of Syria and Cilicia, and I was still unknown in person to the churches of Judea that are in Christ. They only were hearing it said, he who used to persecute us is now preaching the faith he once tried to destroy. And they glorified God because of me. Well, this is interesting. I know this is kind of scattershot. I'm all over the place, but I kind of like following the text. Um, Speaking of fiddling with the text and the question, are we reading it in its original form? This reference to seeing Cephas and meeting of the apostles only James the Lord's brother. Now, does he mean that of the apostles he met Cephas and James so that James is an apostle? Well, Roman Catholics have no problem with that because they think James, um, the son of Zebedee, was the cousin of Jesus, and that brother they tend to take somewhat um, self-servingly theologically, meaning uh, cousins would qualify, and they think James, son of Zebedee, was James and John were cousins of Jesus. I don't know where that the basis for that is, except they just think they need to say that. Um, here's what I'm leading to with all this digression. It's been suggested that this business about, well, starting with verse 18, that after 3 years I went up to Jerusalem to visit Cephas and remained with him 15 days, but I saw none of the other apostles except James, the Lord's brother. Um, that's, of course, the important passage in terms of, was there a historical Jesus? Because if Paul is writing this and he's claiming he met Jesus' own sibling, well, that would kind of settle it, right? That would mean, yeah, I mean, if Jesus' brother was still around, how old could he have been? Jesus must have been a contemporary of Paul, both in the flesh and ruling out the view of, I think, Alvar Ellegard and G.A. Wells, that perhaps there was some historical Jesus, but long before Paul. Well, if this is authentic, and we're being told Paul met the actual physical brother of Jesus, I mean, even if you want to call him a foster brother or a half brother or whatever, that this would rule out an ancient, then ancient already, Jesus, or a contemporary of Paul. But maybe it's an interpolation. And why is that suggested? Of course, our friend Bart Ehrman says that to even suggest such a thing is just what some call surgical exegesis, that the text gives you a problem, so let's say it wasn't originally in the text. By the way, the same stratagem Bart uses to redeem the Testimonium Flavianum, right? Where we have supposedly the testimony of Josephus in the very late first century to Jesus having been a historical figure. And he says, well, all right, he was the Christ line in the Testimonium Flavianum. That's an interpolation. But it seems to me that's surgical exegesis, right? You're trying to take a bad text and make it into a good one. But why does anybody say that this may be an interpolation into Galatians? First of all, it was not a mythicist who said it. There was another reason for somebody else to suggest it, and here's the reason. Uh, um, Tertullian, discussing this passage, does not say that, he doesn't mention this supposed first visit to Jerusalem to meet the apostles. No, I mean, you'd think that if it was in the copy of Galatians he had there in the 2nd century, he'd have quoted this when he's trying to argue that Paul was subordinate to the 12. I mean, this would really make his case, but he doesn't mention it. He does, of course, mention the similar passage in chapter 2, right at the beginning, which says, "Then after 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas, taking Titus along with me. I went up because of a revelation and set before them, though privately, before those who seemed influential, the gospel that I proclaim among the Gentiles, in order to make sure I was not running or had not run in vain. But even Titus, who was with me, was not forced to be circumcised, though he was a Greek," etc., etc. What do you know? In Tertullian's quotation of this, it lacks the again in the first verse, which implies that in the text he was reading, this was the first visit of Paul to meet the pillar apostles, and that it did not contain a reference to him meeting James, the Lord's brother, right? So the uncertainty of the text from a very early witness really weakens the argument that there must have been a contemporary historical Jesus contemporary with Paul. That's very important. It's the difference one word makes, and the what is not cited by Tertullian where you would have to expect it. And one other little thing. Let's see. Okay, where is the thing about when the right time came? You notice how things become invisible when you're looking for them. Um, let's see. This is not quite the same point, but oh boy. Maybe you can help me out here. When the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son. Where the heck is that in here?
Unknown caller.
Wouldn't you know it's a darn phone?
It's in Galatians 4:4.
Oh,
that's where it is.
This is interesting, not quite germane to the same point, thanks. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. Isn't it odd? Doesn't it strike you as strange that he stipulates that when God sent him forth, he was born of a woman and under law? How many times have you heard any discussion of anybody and they say, well, one thing's for sure, he was born, he had a mom? Doesn't that kind of go without saying? So I have to wonder if this was an anti-Marcionite interpolation too, though I have no idea if there's any. I've never heard of any textual evidence that lacks that. But I can't help but take that as an ancient correction of the text by an anti-Marcionite scribe. Anyway, once you're done with the first couple of chapters, you have a kind of a short version of the argument in the epistle to the Romans, and it's very much like it, except for another surprising thing where it says that when God gave the law through Moses, it he was a mediary, and that one does not need a mediator unless there are two groups involved, a group that gives and the group that receives. And let's see. Hmm. Oh man, what is the matter here? I can usually find these things with no problem. Hmm. Man. Boy, this is frustrating. At any rate, he says that in Galatians that the law was given through angels or given by angels. And it had to be so, because if it was simply just God giving it to the people of Israel, he wouldn't have needed a mediator. You only have a mediator, like an arbiter, like a negotiator between two groups of people. And so Israel, that's one group, but the angels who gave the law, that is another group. And then you start noticing elsewhere in the letter that he says, you want to be subject, as you once were, to the elemental spirits, the stoichia. And who were they? Well, they were like subordinate spirits who were equivalent to the biblical angels, and sometimes the names are interchangeable because, excuse me, the angels were in charge of the elements, and there, like you see in the book of Enoch, an angel gives Enoch a tour of the heavenly spheres, and here over here's the compartment where the snowflakes are stored up, and over here is where the stars are cataloged and so on. And the different angels have charge of different depositories of weather phenomena, and hence the elements. Also, when the synonymous designation, the principalities and powers who we have to fight against, when they're mentioned, that's the same thing. And that they're connected with the stars. And so it all forms one big picture. And these angels in Galatians are mentioned to mitigate the authority of the Torah, that it wasn't given directly by God. Now, who else do we know who said that? We tend to read past it real quick if we're operating on traditional Orthodox assumptions. But it turns out, as we read in the Clementine material, that what's the matter with me today? That the Simon Magus, who seems to be a kind of a what would it be, an alias for Paul, He taught, in opposition to Peter, that the angels gave the Torah. Well, that's pretty bluntly stated. And when it's virtually just as clear cut in Galatians, you have to start asking yourself, is this written by Paul as we know him, as orthodoxy has always presented him? And I say no. And this is not far from the Marcionite view that the demiurge, the creator, who was righteous but stern and unforgiving, he gave the law, whereas the Father of Jesus Christ frees us from that with a gospel of love and forgiveness, and that Jesus died, the Son of the good, loving God, as a ransom in exchange for the demiurge, the creator, to yield up any of his created humans who wanted to switch allegiances and become adopted by the Father of Jesus Christ. And so it all kind of fits in, I think, even better with Marcionism. And I tend to think Marcion was a Simonian originally. And I'm partly basing that on Stephen Huller's suggestion that Marcus the magician, whom Irenaeus, I think, says was a disciple of Simon, that was Marcion, because there are a lot of similarities and so forth. The Marcion was already a bit more compromising than the strict rigorism of Simonianism. So I think strange things are going on here. That that most of the epistle, chapters 3 through 6, are likely Marcionite, possibly written by Marcion. And why do I think such a crazy thing as that? Well, again, it's just speculation, but sometimes that's all you've got. When Tertullian starts quoting Galatians, and he has said already that Paul is the apostle of Marcion and the apostle of the heretics. And he says elsewhere that Marcion discovered the epistle to the Galatians. Does he mean the first time Marcion happened upon a copy of it, that it was already being used, he just had never read it before? It could mean that, but I can't help thinking of Joseph Smith discovering the golden plates, when in fact, well, he didn't write them, he got it from several predecessors, Sidney Rigdon, what's his name, Solomon Spaulding, and others who contributed to it before he got a hold of it. It was a modern creation. Similarly, there are Buddhist works from Tibet where they say, oh, in a time of persecution long ago, the monks managed to hide these scriptures, burying them in the earth so the persecutors wouldn't get them and destroy them. But it kind of looks like no. Later monks took it upon themselves to wrote and antedate the things. Oh yeah, it was not us. Oh no, it was these ancient masters. Or in the Bible, when the prophet, prophetess Huldah and couple of priests, I for some reason forget their names, they came to Josiah with some form of the book of Deuteronomy, and they said, hey, look what we found neglected and forgotten when we were refurbishing the temple. It's Deuteronomy with all kinds of reform demands. And Josiah believes them and reads them and says, oh my gosh, we're in big trouble now. We didn't even know we were responsible for, getting rid of idols and all that stuff. Let's try to reform things quick. And they did, but God still lowered the boom on them anyway. So there's this pattern of antedating scriptures to give them the gravity of ancient writings when in fact they're new. And this continues today with new scriptures that pop up. And the secret gospel of Mark might be one of them. The gospel of Jesus' wife, which snookered several scholars, that's another one. And who knows what all. And there's several novels. I wrote a whole book about over 40 lost gospel novels. It's an irresistible idea. And so I think there are interesting little bits of evidence that point to the whole thing being Marcionite, if not by Marcion himself, at least chapters 3 through 6, with the first couple of chapters being by a later Marcionite responding to the book of Acts. So that's way more than you wanted to know. But since when have I? This reminds me of an old gag where a guy was doing Hubert Humphrey, doing a parody, and he gets up there and starts saying, "My fellow Americans, I shall be brief, also terse, succinct, and economical of word and phrase and sentence and paragraph. Yes, I shall be brief." That's me, I have to admit. So take it away, Jacob.
Do you think that Marcion wrote Galatians?
I would not be at all surprised. And it's like this isn't the full Marcionite system on display, but I think that's very much like the Gospel of Truth in Nag Hammadi, which we're told that Valentinus wrote the Gospel of Truth. But Valentinus's whole system as it evolved was much more complicated than what we read in the Nag Hammadi text. But I still think he's the author, and this was an early work. And the basic elements of the full-blown Marcionite system are there, but it isn't all that explicit yet. I'd say that that's kind of what we're dealing with in Galatians 3 through 6.
Could you tell us about your thoughts on Tertullian claiming that Marcion discovered Galatians and what he meant by that?
Well, I just think because he doesn't explain it, but it seems to me that because elsewhere he just says, I think he took a letter by Paul and cut stuff out of it that was friendly to the Old Testament and Judaism. And he admits, though, that of course Marcion says that I added things to it, or that we did, we Catholics. And he says, back and forth. He doesn't suggest how one might settle the question, but he goes on assuming that, it's intact the way it's in the canon. But it seems to me that the idea that he discovered it does imply that he wrote it and attributed it to Paul. And because that's what a lot of these guys did, right? Fourth Ezra, was it really by Ezra? No. But for the sake of the literary pose of the book, that Ezra is having a dialogue with the angel Uriel and so forth, same sort of a thing. All of these pseudepigraphical books were written under the name of some ancient person because they figured this is what they would have said had they lived today, or whatever. So despite, like Bart says that, well, there were forgers, let's just be blunt about it. I'd say that's true, but for whatever reason, look at the content. It's not like they're trying to swindle you into anything. Like, you don't have Paul or Ezra saying, I got a bridge in Brooklyn I'd like to sell you, and God told me to. Or like Imus's old shticks with Reverend Billy Saul Hargis. I don't know if anybody's lucky enough or old enough to remember those, but he would do this bit on his radio show where he was this fraudulent radio evangelist, Billy Saul Hargis. And he would say that most people know that Jesus was a carpenter, but few realize he made several sets of living room and dining room furniture, and we have them. So, if the price is right, you can have furniture made by Jesus. Or he said, you don't just die and go to heaven. No, you have to make reservations. On the wings of him, most Protestants go coach. And I mean, you don't find that kind of nonsense in any of these pseudepigraphical works, right? There's no attempt to deceive you into anything. They're trying to be edifying and so on. And so, however they rationalized it, there's no. We see an ethical problem that apparently they did not see. I don't think there's any, it's not some kind of criticism to say that Marcion did write the thing and that others decided, well, I don't like this and that point. So I think I'm going to mitigate it by saying that Christ didn't have a human birth. He just descended from heaven, an inference from Luke chapter 4. He appeared in Capernaum and so on, or the stuff I mentioned. They decided to make it more Orthodox friendly. Again, you can't prove it, but given the historical analogy with all these other holy hoaxes, oh yeah, we found this ancient text. We better pay attention to it. Deutero-Zechariah, etc. So I don't see a problem with it.
You mentioned that that Jerome tells us that Marcion's text at 1:1 originally credited Jesus' resurrection to Jesus himself and not to the Father or anyone else.
Yeah, John has that also, right? That actually, there it survives into the text. If I lay down my life, I can take it up again. So if that's found elsewhere, it's no surprise. And what was that added, or was the opposite interpolated? One of my favorite examples of that in the Gospel of John is where in chapter 14, you have this amazing interchange where Philip says, Lord, you're talking about the Father all the time. Show us the Father, and that'll satisfy us. And Jesus says, Philip, have I been with you this long? You still don't recognize me? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. Huh? And then suddenly you hear, don't you believe that the Father is in me and I am in the Father? What? What does that mean? Well, all it means is you thought I was saying I am the Father, but I'm not, right? I meant something else. I think it's like a redactional change to calm down the heresy of patripassianism. Right. I think this is the same sort of a thing that they scribes say, wait a minute, if Jesus raised himself from the dead, that brings up the same kind of problem. How could he have done that if he's one person with two natures or whatever? I mean, how can you raise yourself from the dead if you're dead? So did that mean the Christ and Jesus are not the same guy? That Jesus was the channeler for the Christ Spirit? And that's who raised him? Oh, no, we don't want to touch that. Let's obscure it somehow. So that's what I suspect happened there. But again, I don't know that we have any textual evidence for it. But we wouldn't, right? We don't have anything early enough to attest such things.
It almost sounds like that's a response to the gospel of the Hebrews having Christ possess Jesus at the baptism to me.
Hmm. That's right, though they don't like that. Well, why is it that Mark has the Spirit come down and enter into Jesus, not rest upon Jesus as Matthew and Luke have? It's obvious Matthew and Luke didn't like the almost overt separationism that Jesus and the Christ were different entities temporarily aligned, like Judy Zebra Knight and Ramtha, right? She's channeling him, and sort of she of course was just a fraud, saying, "Why don't you buy horses that sold by Judy Knight?" What? And that's the kind of chicanery you don't really find in even in redacted, rewritten stuff. Nobody's trying to get away with anything. They're just trying to correct the text theologically.
So do you think that Galatians 3:6 was written earlier than the Gospels, or do you think that's also after the Gospels? It's like Galatians 1 and 2.
3, 6. Shouldn't have closed that Bible. Galatians, here we are. Galatians 3, 6. Just as Abraham believed God and it was counted to him as righteousness. Do I think that's an interpolation? Are we thinking of the same verse?
I was asking you if you think chapters 3 to 6 were written before the Gospels
gosh, stupid me. Yeah,
or after.
I'm thinking again. My working hypothesis is that 3 through 6 were written by Marcion, though again, at least by a Marcionite, and 1 through 2, I think, are written by a Marcionite, but later, not Marcion himself. And it would have been natural to, as a kind of a piece of apologetics, add it on to the original.
So do you think that there are basically contradictions between chapters 3 to 6 and 1 to 2? Like you see, I think you've been implying that throughout our discussion today, that there are conflicts in their views about Jesus and the relationship to the law.
Let's see. Well, I don't know that the law would have been the problem, because even in the first 2 chapters, there is certainly this definite idea that at least Gentile Christians don't have to keep the law, and that even when Jewish Christians do, if they understand it rightly, they're doing it not as a means of salvation. Like when he has Paul rebuke Peter, he says, "Look, you and I both know it's faith in Christ that is saving. If you say you have to keep the Torah to be saved, as apparently your buddies from James do think, then why did Jesus die? What was the point?" I mean, if that's just if the law is the deciding factor, what's the point? Why did he come? Why did he die? And so it seems to me that is pretty consistent with the rest of it, because you have this argument that also appears in Romans that look at Abraham. He didn't keep the Torah. There wasn't any Torah yet, but he did have faith. Okay, not in Jesus, but the faith analogous to the belief that God raised a dead man to life again. In Abraham's case, it was that his wife could bear a child, though she's like nearly a century old. That seemed pretty unlikely too, but he dared to believe it, and that was counted to him as merit. I take more of a Catholic view on that. Righteousness, meaning he got the points for this extraordinary exercise of faith. He says that's what we're asked to do, but things have changed. Now a different life from death thing has happened. Jesus dead, raised from the dead. I mean, that doesn't happen every day. You couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. But if you believe that God did it, you're just like Honest Abe. He believed in an apparently impossible thing, and God accepted that as a real righteousness in his account, right? Or a big check mark there. And that's what he does with you. And it's faith that saves, not the law. He comes very close to the what would you call it, anthropological view of this in modern theory. That in fact, this was anciently known. You find in the Epistle of Aristeas the idea. It's like an apologist who's writing for Gentiles. He says, I know you think things about our faith are silly, like why can't you eat mice? What? Why would God demand this? Well, look, I know it's trivial, but that's kind of the point. God gave these laws to Moses to make Jewish behavior distinctive enough that if you were raised to keep that law, you wouldn't easily assimilate to paganism, which was especially a big problem in the times that Aristeas and Paul wrote. It was a way of raising the bar, raising the wall of separation, so that Jews would not easily just go through a revolving door. Some did anyway, and we read about it, like in 1 Corinthians. Circumcised Jews who believed in Jesus. Well, I'm sorry, circumcised Jews, whether they believed in Jesus or not, they wanted to assimilate. And Paul says, and people have wondered, what the heck is he talking about? He says, if you're circumcised, don't seek to remove the marks of circumcision to fit in, because if you went to the gym for a workout, well, people did that naked. That's why they called them gymnasiums, places for nakedness. And because you, like in the Olympics, all the athletes were naked. So if you're going to do that, and you would be, and you wanted to fit in with the Gentile gang, it would be embarrassing. Hey, this guy's circumcised, and you wanted to fit in, so you would take. It's so grotesque. You'd have to take this operation called epispasm, where you surgically. You were without the foreskin, so you pulled the skin down over the tip of the penis and somehow grafted it on. I can't imagine such a thing, but they would do that, and he's saying, "Hey, don't do that." But people were. But the laws that seemed so picky, as Aristeas, himself a Hellenized Jew, says, yeah, it is artificial. It's a way of segregating Jews from Gentiles, because if you don't, we're going to be assimilated away. The reason why conservative Jews oppose interfaith marriages, they're not bigots. They just realize that if Jews marry Christians, there's a great danger of them just saying, well, I'll change religions. It'll be easier that way. No, don't do it. Soon it's not going to be any Judaism anymore. So I'm sorry for this rant. I just can't shut up. But the point is, Paul anticipates that when he says, if you're a Jew, like you're a fish swimming in water, you're not really keeping the law as second nature to you. But if you convert a Gentile over to Christianity and tell him or her they have to keep the law, you're just putting an unnecessary stumbling block in their path. Why should they why should they embrace alien mores and so forth? That really is not central to salvation or faith in Christ. They don't have to keep the ceremonial law, and that's what he's talking about. Paul never says the moral law is abrogated, right? And so that's you still have that in all through Galatians, and it's I think an accurate and very apt description of the Jewish stance. They knew a lot of this stuff seemed picky, but that was the whole idea. We want to make it tough to exit and assimilate. Of course, it's also tempting to assimilate if you are chiding at the rigorousness of Jewish law, but I have to assume most Jews weren't. They were raised that way.
So, for my final question, do you see any hints that the temple has been destroyed by the time that Galatians was written down? Because many scholars will try to say it mentions James, the Lord's brother. It's got Paul going up to Jerusalem a couple of times. Clearly, the temple was still standing when Galatians written down. They use that as evidence that it's by Paul.
Well, of course, if you're adopting the pose of being Paul, you, unless you were totally ignorant, you would know that the temple was standing at the time, and so you would refer to it that way. But I don't know that that proves that it actually was Paul. It's just part of the shtick, part of the role he's playing. Now, I admit, again, my views are speculative. So who knows? Maybe it is Paul, and the temple is standing, but there are little hints, like with this, like in 2:19. If I should rebuild what I tore down, I prove myself to be a transgressor. Is he sort of thinking of the temple as a what's the word, synecdoche, a part for the whole of Judaism, and he's saying that whole edifice is torn down, the requirement for the Torah and all that, and that Christ is substituting for that. It's not absolutely clear, but it well, like this thing with how chapter 4:1. I mean that the heir, as long as he is a child, is no different from a slave, though he's the owner of everything. But he is under guardians and managers until the date set by his father. In the same way, we also, when we were children, were enslaved to the elementary principles of the world. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. Well, this was so epical an event, that the coming of Christ is to bring to an end the old dispensation. That already is sort of pregnant with the idea that the temple system is kaput, or it's on its way out. And of course, in the Hebrews, it's clear that that's over with. That the sacrifice of Christ is replaced and improved upon the temple sacrifices. And all of the talk about how the law is obsolete for Christians seems to me to be kind of synecdoche for the whole Levitical system. But it's not explicit, I admit, but to me that makes more sense. And like the times of the Gentiles, right, in Luke, that is coincident with the destruction of the temple, and so that then the same author can depict Paul as saying, because of Christ, you can be justified for things that you couldn't have been under the law. That sounds a lot like Hebrews also. So it's not explicit, but it seems to me it may very well be implicit that the temple and the whole darn thing is gone and Christ has replaced it.
I want to make this point that I forgot to mention earlier, that if Paul did preach against circumcision before 70, I think there's a good chance he probably could have gotten killed, because Josephus says that the Zealots forced Gentiles, adult Gentiles, to circumcise. They weren't going out debating if it was necessary. They were making people do it.
Yeah.
That's a strange conundrum that the standard view cannot explain.
This brings up the opposition to circumcision by non-Jews today, who are urging that circumcision be outlawed because it's really child abuse. I find that very frightening. You're seriously suggesting you're going to outlaw the central ritual of Jewish identity? That's like Antiochus Epiphanes. What are you going to do to parents who circumcise their kids? I think that is really anti-Jewish persecution waiting to happen. And I hope it never comes to that. I say leave Jews alone, for Pete's sake.
So again, the links to purchase Bob's books will be in the description below and the pinned comment, including the link to his Substack page. And with that being said, Bob, thank you for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me on. It's great fun.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.